For those who may not know Sapphire, can you give us a quick overview of who you are and the kind of problems you've been solving in the market?
And my name is Gabino Roche. I'm the CEO and founder at Saphyre. Good to meet you.
Hi, my name is Stephen Roche. I'm the president and co-founder at Saphyre, and Saphyre focuses on trade readiness. For nearly a decade, we've worked across legal, operations, risk, technology teams to help firms become ready to trade faster. That means partnering with onboarding, legal, tax, KYC, credit teams to synchronize this data internally and across all counterparties. So accounts and agreements and entities align before trading even begins. And while much of the industry has focused on fixing issues in the post-trade, the reality is that the same gaps that delay readiness are the same gaps that delay settlement. Post-trade problems usually start as pre-trade misalignment, and if you're not ready upstream, you're gonna feel that downstream.
All right, Stephen. So Sapphire has been active across a lot of areas recently. Are you seeing common themes emerge, particularly around the US Treasury, clearing and securities lending?
What we're seeing is that Treasury clearing and securities lending look different on the surface, but they rely on the same foundation: legal clarity, accurate entity data, and operational alignment. So in both cases, firms are asking for, is this account eligible? Is this agreement valid? Are these entities properly mapped? So it's to create this kind of Rosetta Stone mapping and data normalization that's missing in most of these operational processes. Excuse me, Gabino, I'm stealing a line from you. That's one of his famous sayings. It's why we have the diamond in Sapphire behind me. Is whether you're ready to lend or ready to clear. The core issue is that there isn't a single reliable source of truth on this data. And the market is realizing that manual processes simply don't scale to meet that demand. So different mandates, same foundation.
If I can add to that real quick. So it's always the old tale right now in the industry where two parties are not on the same page looking at the same information. It's out of sync. So whether we're talking the traditional trading space with a lot of capital markets firms and their buy side firms, or you're talking between a lender and a borrower, the problem is actually the same when you're talking about, hey, KYC, tax, legal, credit risk. It's the same process. So we're basically taking the same wheel and applying it to US Treasury clearing, the US Treasury clearing mandate, or securities lending and the ALD process.
When firms look at the US Treasury clearing mandate, what's the biggest challenge they tend to underestimate? Also, how does that differ from the sell side versus the buy side?
Okay, well, that's an excellent question because it is significantly different between the buy side and the sell side. And when we say the sell side, in particular, the biggest pain point is for the clearing broker because the clearing broker is the member to these clearing houses, in particular FIC, where now you're required for all US treasuries, where previously you didn't need to paper this. You will need to paper and and have these buy side firms and their underlying clients as part of this sponsored membership agreement, right? With each clearinghouse, in particular with FIC. And the clearing brokers who are the members of these clearinghouses, again, in particular FIC, FICC, they have to do this for literally thousands of clients, okay? And so now some of that work is ongoing today. They're manually repapering this work, and then they need to send this information to the FICC. And the goal here is actually we've been working with some of these firms to help them get all the existing repapering they've already accomplished and that information over to FIC in bulk in a digitized format. So completely digitally capturing all this information, sending it to the clearinghouse on behalf of these clearing brokers. But this now gets complicated slightly because it's not just the sponsored agreements and sponsored membership agreements that need to be amended and the data that needs to be sent to the clearinghouse. That's just to make sure that you're trade ready on US Treasuries by the end of 2026. By the beginning of 2027, though, we have to make sure that your repos are good too. That means repapering your MRAs or GMRA agreements as well. So there's a 2-for-1 job on the buy side that needs to amend these agreements. So that means buy sides who've traded US Treasuries need to think about, have I papered over my entities and funds to be covered by sponsored membership agreements to FIC? That's part one with my clearing brokers. And sometimes you have one or more clearing brokers for each fund. So you could have clearing broker A and clearing broker B, that's two sponsored membership agreements, two sponsored agreements that you need to map for all the entities that you use with them. And that's just for US Treasuries. Then you need to make sure you take care of your MRAs and GMRAs. What Saphyre is doing for the buy side is a 2-for-1 benefit. While you're repapering your repos, you can repaper your treasuries. Okay, and you're doing it with your clearing brokers, and therefore getting all that information to the clearinghouse, in this case, the FICC. For the clearing brokers, we help them do this with their underlying buy-side clients, digitize that process, and get it over to the clearinghouse. That is getting you this one-time repapering effort done.
My next question actually adds on to the FICC angle as well. Clearing brokers are facing a massive volume problem with sponsored agreements. How does Sapphire's work with FICC help address that at scale?
Yeah, so my previous answer kind of addressed the clearing broker's pain point. I got ahead of it. So I would break it down this way. In the buy side scenario that I answered before, we're dealing it at the point of inception. So if the buy side's involved, they get the US Treasuries covered and their repos covered in a 2-for-1 benefit. For the clearing brokers, the biggest pain point is just meeting the deadline to repaper all this information in time for the end of 2026 for US Treasuries and in time for repos by the beginning of 2027. This is where we get you to scale a streamlined STP, fully digitized, integrated process end to end between the clearing broker and these clearing houses. So you're going to hear some news on that front very, very shortly.
So, you both talk about intelligent automation and in many of your thought leadership pieces. What specifically would you say intelligence applies to the US Treasury clearing mandate?
Yeah, it's easy to say the word automation, and you can automate for automation's sake. But if you don't have intelligent automation, that's where the mistakes occur. And the idea behind intelligent automation is also memory of trading relationships, clearing relationships, custodial relationships, lending relationships, platform relationships. That's the complexity when you heard Stephen steal my line around the Rosetta Stone account mapping, is when you leverage Saphyre in the onboarding process, but also the maintenance of those accounts, we will remember when a clearing relationship has changed. So for example, there's an expiration date for something and an effective date for the new clearing relationship. If we have clients, buy-side clients with multiple umbrella agreements for their ISDAs or their GERMAs. Underneath each one of those, with the same broker, it might be two different clearing entities that has the responsibility for clearing on behalf of those funds for that client. Saphyre is mapping the beneficial owner with the investment manager entities to the clearing broker entities to the sponsored agreement to the MRA, and then sending out all that relevant information to FIC. And why is that important? It's not just for paper legal reasons, it's for trading compliance reasons. So now you are clear ready, trade ready. Those are the two important parts because that's what gets you into settlement guarantee.
Stephen, would you like to add anything to that?
No, it's a theme that we've been working on for almost a decade. Everybody's thinking about the machine learning. Everybody wants to implement workflows, but what's missing, and this is why there's a lot of manual labor being put in place, is people who have context to that data. But if you remove headcount or you move it overseas and they don't understand the context of that data or how the trading relationships exist, like Gabino was just saying, you have these compounding issues. You cannot address these mandates like the US Treasury clearing issue that comes up, or helping with lending setups and situations that happen in post-trade around that. So the intelligence is really what's missing in a lot of this. The structure that we're trying to create, or that we're trying to get the industry to collaborate with, is really the solution to making this a lot easier.
Yeah, I think one of the things, real quick, Zara, I'm just going to add, maybe this might be a good point, is these are all things that were agreed to previously. It's just to bring this home, the industry trades on an 8-digit code, Zara. That 8-digit code hides everything I just described in my prior answer around the beneficial owner entity, the investment manager entity, the clearing entities, the executing broker entities, to which trading agreements, the GMRA and MRA, to which sponsored agreements and sponsored membership agreements for clearing. So that 8-digit code is why the industry forgets. And as Stephen said, if you just offshore all that, then you're relying on labor to somehow remember. And when you're doing this across thousands of trades, tens of thousands of trades, maybe millions in a given day, you're not going to remember it. You're going to make mistakes against it, or the information may have changed. And so the idea is if you build infrastructure that remembers the mapping of those relationships, like that Rosetta Stone that I keep talking about, layer the intelligent automation on top of it, because that's where you get the scale.
Would you also say this automated intelligence has a place in securities lending space? Stephen, you referred to securities lending space for a bit in this. So it's just adding on to that, especially when it comes to ALD concerns.
Yeah, I'll jump in here on this one. And the ALD process has been a little bit conflated from two angles. There is a onboarding ALD process, and then there's an ongoing ALD process. And this is really around agent lending disclosures, right? And the challenge behind this is a lot of the major lenders on the street have something what we call an omnibus account, where they don't really tell you who the underlying client is. And I'm making up names here. These are not real examples. I just putting this disclaimer, but to bring it home for folks, you use names, it creates a way to kind of visualize this, right, in your heads. The Walmart pension fund, the IBM pension fund, the Coca-Cola pension fund, they may have an account custody with Bank of New York or whoever, right? And if Bank of New York or any agent lender lends, you only know it's Bank of New York. You don't know it. The underlying assets are being lent from those accounts. And so from an onboarding standpoint, you got to find out what that is, but you only have a lending account number. Okay. And the reason why I'm talking about this intelligent automation in the context of securities lending, here's the beautiful part. A lot of these firms already leverage Saphyre in the custody aspect, because that Walmart pension fund is opening up a custodial account directly, and therefore has already conducted the KYC review, has already done the tax review, has already collected all that information. Do you need to do it again when you're doing the lending business? No. If you intelligently remember, you can now leverage that and send it out to all your borrowers. Here's even a better story, Zara. If you are doing regular trading with brokers, you may be trading on the Walmart pension fund, equities or FX with a borrower, and I'm making up names again. It could be Citi borrower, it could be JP Morgan borrower. It doesn't matter which borrower we're talking about, but those borrowers may already know those funds from a trading standpoint. So if you're doing now lending or borrowing, do you still need to do KYC and tax again? No, you don't. You already know, and you already have that information. And believe it or not, and this is not on any firm, but not all firms do this, but quite a few do, they wind up redoing this information multiple times. So with intelligent automation, you can immediately speed STP, the entire KYC tax process. Done. Okay, one time between custody, trading, and lending. The third piece is the legal step. So the negotiations of the agreements are very simple. You already have an existing agreement with most of your borrowers. It's just adding the IBM pension fund, the Walmart pension fund to that umbrella agreement. Saphyre then is now helping to pre-fill that information so that that papering process is done. You can fully execute this in a completely digitized format. Now we've spent not just KYC and tax, but legal. So the last step is really credit risk. And that's where the bottleneck is. That's where they have to assess things. And the idea is that Saphyre is going to be able to send more data to allow the borrowers to speed up the credit risk process. And the beautiful part is we already pretty much STP the first three, the KYC, tax, and legal, so that credit can move on. That's from the onboarding process. There's a lot more in the post-trade ongoing ALD process where you got to check your credit status over time. And so this is where Saphyre then brings that same scale into the ongoing ALD process. But that was a mouthful, but hopefully that makes sense for your audience.
I think that would make sense for the audience. And I think that really addresses all the aspects of the question that I had asked. From what we understand, the onboarding process in security lending is painfully long and still dreadfully manual. What do you see as the best way to streamline this? You mentioned how the automated procedure already kind of accelerates the procedure, but is there more that you'd say would add to this?
Yeah, I think the succinct way of thinking is just like from a trading standpoint, we say, are you ready to trade? Now what we're sharing with the sec lending world is, are you ready to lend? It's pretty much the same process. And the beautiful part for the major agent lenders is we already are working directly with their principals, those beneficial owners in the custody aspect. So you don't have to bother your clients, the Walmart pension fund, the IBM pension fund, those guys, for the same documents again. We remember it and now leverage it in the lending business to the borrowers. So it's really, I think, without restating what I shared before about now giving full transparency, because that's the other part of the process is a lot of these lenders are sending out these accounts and they don't know when it's going to get onboarded so that they can start the lending, aka borrowing business. So it's all about getting ready to lend, just like we're helping the trading business about ready to trade.
So there are initiatives going on and completed in every firm. How is Saphyre differentiating itself from the other SaaS workflows in the finance space to assist in securities lending or any other financial applications?
So most workflows, workflow tools manage tasks. They help move information from point A to point B, but the difference with Saphyre is the memory and synchronization that Gabino's been talking about here. We don't just automate steps. We maintain the trading relationships between entities, accounts, agreements, and counterparties, all that context over time from the client onboarding process all the way through settlement. That's why our foundation works across treasury clearing, securities lending, derivatives, FX, et cetera, because we're not just mapping a process, we're maintaining data integrity and readiness. We do that in an interoperable way. Firms can plug into our intelligence layer without having to rip out their existing systems. So you can't scale operations without a system that understands relationships. Automation only works when it remembers.
The other thing that I would add to what Stephen shared is most SaaS solutions and most solutions in general work in a bilateral fashion, Zara. And what do I mean by bilateral fashion? So when you have those examples like the IBM pension fund, the Walmart pension fund, the Coca-Cola pension fund, they may not be the direct users of a platform like Saphyre, but they are the owners of the information. They're the beneficial owners. They may hire, and again, making up names. These are not real examples because I need to make these disclaimers, but they may be hiring a Fidelity, a BlackRock, a Vanguard, whoever, right, to manage their accounts for them. And those technology SaaS platforms will pretend that those third-party investment managers are the owner of the information. They're not, but they're the ones who are putting the fingertips to keyboards in that example. And then the receiving party on the bank side is the owner of the same information when in reality, they're holding it in context to the underlying clients that I mentioned before. This is where Saphyre is different because we actually create placeholders as if those parties are participating on the platform, even when they're not. And that's why you have data integrity, because we understand the true relationship of the bilateral parties and all the third parties that are participating on the platform.
That was a wonderful answer, and I think it explained everything quite well. Do you have any parting statements you'd like to give before we conclude our discussion today?
All right, I'm sure Gabino has his own parting statements, but let me start with mine. The market is entering a period where scale and transparency are non-negotiable. Regulations like treasury clearing and the pressures in securities lending are temporary, but they signal a structural shift. Firms that invest in readiness infrastructure now will operate with more confidence, less risk, greater agility in the years ahead. So for us, we look at this as readiness is not just an event anymore, it's an operating model moving forward.
And the one thing I'll add is what I'm excited about is as we go down this journey, what was left unsaid here, Zara, is Saphyre is going through a data normalization process. So when I told you that we are creating placeholders for parties who are not on, believe it or not, everyone thinks AI is going to understand human behavior. And I will tell you, human behavior, sometimes, people say potato and spell it differently, literally. And I mean this in the finance world. And I always use an example such as something called CDX. I know I'm getting really in the weeds. This is a label for credit, the asset class of credit. But if you go down to the trading instruments, there's 13 of them, okay? We have clients who will type in the acronym CDX, but they only mean 6 of the 13 trading instruments, okay? So that's called a human behavior that is not documented anywhere. AI cannot read a website, a manual, or anything to know that for this particular client, this is their behavior that they've been doing for 30 years that you're never going to change, but they mean the 6 trading instruments. And why am I explaining this is because as we go through this journey in the beginning and we invest these placeholders for these unwritten behaviors by clients, this creates scalability because we've normalized the data for those firms versus their counterparties. You layer AI on top of it, and now Saphyre can actually play a multi-protocol agnostic approach. What do I mean by this? First, everyone talks about standards. ISO 2022, ISO 2025 is the common domain, fixed latest, Swift, you name it. Now you have DLT, smart contracts. The idea is if you actually now have normalized this data in such a way by firm and you have an opinion on how that works, one client can be on API, one client can be on Fix, one client can be on Swift, one client can be on smart contracts DLT. Because you actually know how those data points relate to each party. You know, I'm sure very well, the industry says everyone get on the same standard. And I used to work at some of these firms, and even within the same team, they're using multiple standards. Okay, so unless you're able to meet them where they're at, we're not going to wait for a religious conversion for everyone to use one standard. And so to me, the exciting part that we're exploring now is how we allow this multi-protocol effect to occur. Because when we do that, that helps firm transition to blockchain ultimately, right?
That was very interesting, and I think there were some great points. And I think this is where we'd like to conclude our discussion. I don't have any more questions to ask, and I think all the questions that were asked were answered pretty well. So thank you.